Follow Michael Kaskey-Blomain on Twitter at the real Mike KB for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Mike, how you doing on this Monday?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I was enjoying listening to you two guys banter for a bit. I think you guys could get like a talk show thing type going.
You think so? Maybe we got something going here.
I think so, man. I would tune in.
All right, sold.
We got that vote. That works. Mike,
all I need is one.
Look, Mike, you know, the Sixer fan base is obviously a very emotional one because they beat the Celtics, they're on top of the world. They lose to the Hawks, they're on the bottom of the world. So what is the happy medium between the two emotional extremes of the last two games in perspective of this Sixers team?
I think the happy medium is that the Sixers are a very, very talented team that still has some things to figure out. After making a couple blockbuster moves over the course of the season, I think you see a team that can pretty much contend with, any team in the league. They have wins at Golden State. They've beaten Denver, the top two teams in the West. Obviously, over that 6-game winning streak, you saw they had wins over, three of the other top teams in the East, the Bucks, the Celtics, and the Pacers. And then they drop, a disappointing game to an Atlanta Hawks team that has given them trouble now twice this season. But to me, that, it tells the story of, A, team's going to lose a game, but B, they can, contend with anyone, but there's still some issues, especially on the defensive end, I think that, they need to iron out before they're really going to feel, or at least, the fans will feel confident with them, going into the playoffs.
Where would you rate them now on level of your confidence in them? Because I think that the win over the Celtics showed that they have the ability to push themselves that next level. But I think also the Hawks game showed that if a team is aware of your weaknesses enough, that they can expose them.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it, Josh. I'm pretty confident to an extent, but I think two things. I think there's limitations within the roster that, may or may not be able to be overcome by just the talent in the starting lineup, namely the lack of depth, especially offensively, coming off the bench. A lot of these other contenders have deeper teams, more players that can come in and contribute and really make a difference that the Sixers just don't have. It's going to be a matter of if, the Sixers starting five can kind of make up for that's yet to be seen. And like you said, at this point, the defense is just not what it was last year for whatever reason, whether it's, being Lloyd Pierce, different personnel, the overturn in the roster, just the combination of those factors. I think the fact that, like you said, Josh, they have a clear weakness in, guards that are able to, shoot and penetrate. They've had trouble with guys like that, Kemba Walker, Trae Young, Kyrie, guys like that all year. And, obviously if in a series where a team knows that and can, exploit it, that could potentially give them issues.
MKB, it's been a while since I spoke to you. And, since we've last spoke, there's been wins, as Josh mentioned, against the Bucks, against the Celtics, which we all know that narrative and that storyline. So what have you seen from this team as of late, as far as anything different on the court? For me, I've seen a swagger and a confidence change. I feel like everyone's more comfortable. Maybe there's more urgency. I don't know what it is, but it's a good sign if you try and not think too much about the Hawks loss. So I want your thoughts on what you've seen from this team, specifically with the big wins over the Bucks and the Celtics.
Yeah, good to talk to you, by the way, Ryan. But yeah, I definitely agree. There's an added level of confidence, and I think you said comfort, and I think that's the main thing. I think you just really see the players and the guys kind of getting more comfortable with not only with each other, but I think with their roles on the team as well. I think you're really starting to see guys kind of settle into, we always know what Joel is going to be. We've seen Jimmy really settle into that closer role and also more of like a ball handler role. I think Ben's become increasingly comfortable with being, a primary ball handler in transition and fast break situations, but not quite as much in the half court set where a guy like Jimmy or even Tobias has the ball in his hands a little bit more. I think we're just seeing obviously Joel getting back from injury and playing at the level he's played at has obviously had a big part in it. But I think, after the big trade to get Jimmy that shook things up, and then, 2 months later doing it again to get Tobias, I think now that, these guys have, I think, eight or nine games together and still 10 more to play in the regular season. They're getting that cohesiveness a little bit that comes with playing together. And I think they all realize, from talking to them after the games, how much talent, that they're playing with. I don't think that's lost on any of them. And they kind of, appreciate, the level of the players around them. And it's just like a matter of them continuing to get, gel and, grow that confidence and cohesiveness. And that's really Brett's kind of been emphasizing. His role at this point is to kind of steer them in that, forward direction and make sure that continues to develop, because that will really, ultimately make the difference on how far they're able to go in the postseason this year.
Yeah, completely agree. And, one of the mottos as of late from, stemming from Brett Brown has been perfecting vanilla, which I actually love. I think it's AKA simplify things. We're not overcomplicating it. We have the better starting five pretty much on any given night. Excuse me. But from a defensive end, from a defensive standpoint, there's concerns. And I'm not overreacting over the Hawks loss or anything like that, but there's been a trend throughout the entire year of the Sixers' struggles against guards that can attack the paint, specifically attack the pick and roll with Embiid involved. And we saw that against Trae Young. We see it against Kemba Walker, and the list goes on and on. So is there legit concerns for you there? And how can they, listen, they're not going to perfect it, but how can they tighten some things up on the defensive end as they gear up for the playoffs?
Yeah, Ryan, I do think there's a legit concern there. It's probably, at least for me, the biggest concern of any aspect. Offensively, I think they're as capable as any team to compete. I think defensively is definitely where, a level of concern creeps in with this team. And, it's a matter of, the scheme. They're obviously, a lot of people point out there, it's a switch-heavy team. They switch basically on all screens or most screens, and that ends up with a lot of, mismatches, whether it's bigger guys like Joel or a Mike Scott out on the perimeter, or if it's, a smaller guy matched up on somebody in the post. But it ends up making, life difficult for the Sixers. It's, if it comes to the postseason and maybe they perhaps want to alter that approach, cut back on the screens, or if they want to, have particular matchups, they got Jimmy in to be a guy that could kind of defend and, be that guy to guard some of these guards. And we've seen him struggle with it. But, that kind of goes back to also what I was talking about with the depth. They have what they have at this point in the season in terms of defenders. JJ, we all know what he is out there. And you can only, you want him out there offensively, but you can only hide him to, a certain extent on the defensive end. That's kind of proven to be an issue, especially against the Celtics. So, I don't have an easy answer for how they can necessarily, make an adjustment, unless it's a specific matchup. But I do definitely agree that, that's a concern, especially if you're talking about, let's say a first-round matchup against a team like the Brooklyn Nets that has dynamic guards, or then obviously moving forward, against a team like the Celtics, or even a team like the Raptors who have, Kyle Lowry and a guy like Kawhi that's able to penetrate like a guard. It's, definitely an issue that could cause them trouble in the postseason.
Really quick, Mike, would you rather have Mike Lowry or Kyle Lowry? I say Mike Lowry.
That's not even a question. Give me Mike Lowry all day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just had to verify. You can go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, it's fine. We were going to cut the interview off if you said Kyle. But MKB, you mentioned the depth of the Sixers, and it is what it is at this point. But, Mike Scott has had some really good games. Ennis has had, in my opinion, some surprisingly decent games. I'm more of a fan of Scott than Ennis, but I love having them both. And then Boban, Jonah, and Amir. That's the question. That's kind of the front court, quote-unquote, issue that a lot of people point towards. How do you see, those five guys fitting in and what their roles are going to be down the stretch? Obviously, I know it's matchup related, but, one game, I think it was the Charlotte game, where Brett Brown decided to go small. He also had to go small, but he left Ennis in there late. They played some small ball. And, that's kind of a good option. Do you see that option resurfacing in the playoffs? How much time are we going to see from the big men? And then the Scott Ennis dynamic, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, that's going to be a huge, obviously a huge impact on the team in the playoffs. And I think that's something that Brett is still tinkering with. He addresses it after, before and after basically every game, that it's still, kind of fluid. I definitely think your point about James Ennis is well taken. I definitely think he's carved out his, his niche for the playoffs as the guy off the bench for the wing spot. And then I do think they're going to end up going a lot of small ball. I think that Celtics game last week was a good example of where, Boban really, for what he brings to the floor in situations against the Celtics, he was, looking borderline unplayable, against some of their quicker, bigger guys like Al Horford, or even Baines was able to get around him. In a situation like that, you might look at, to keep Mike Scott in at the 5. But, the rotation of TJ and Ennis is, pretty much set in stone. And then Brett has said, basically specifically that it's not a battle between like Boban, even Amir and Jonah Bolden, and even Mike Scott at the 5. They're not necessarily competing for like one center spot. It's going to be fluid depending on, like you said, Ryan, matchup dependent on, if they end up facing, the Bucks in the second round matchup, or the Raptors team, both of them who have, traditional bigger guys. They both have a Gasol on the roster. Guys like that, maybe we'll see more Boban or even Amir. But against a team, like the Celtics, for instance, or a quicker team like the Nets, where a guy like Boban or Amir would kind of be out of place in some of that switching defense, you'll probably see a lot more of maybe Jonah, or maybe just a lot more of, Mike Scott at the 5, maybe even some Ben Simmons at the 5, which they've ran out, a few times, putting him in the post offensively and defensively, matching him up against with a forward. So I definitely think that's something they're going to tinker with. But in terms of the rotation, I think it's pretty well set. I don't think we're going to see, barring some incredible play, I think Jonathan Simmons has pretty much played himself out of the playoff rotation. TJ obviously is TJ. Brett will, always bring him in for that spark off the bench. So, I mean, you're going to look at TJ, James Ennis, and Mike Scott are, the 3 staples for sure. And then depending on, the situation and the matchup, combination of, Bolden, Amir, and, the other center rotation.
All right, first round matchup, MKB. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but why not? Nets, Pistons, Heat. They're battling. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out down the stretch. Nets up a half a game on the Pistons for the 6th spot. They're up a game and a half on the Heat. How do you see that playing out? And more importantly, what's the ideal quote-unquote road to at least the Eastern Conference Finals for the Sixers team?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to tell, Ryan. Like you said, I think a first-round matchup with the Pistons would be pretty ideal. I think the Sixers, pretty well matched up with them. But I've said this a bunch of times. When it comes to those 4 top teams in the East, like I feel like any of those teams, being the Pistons, the Sixers, the Celtics, the Raptors, or the Bucks, I feel like any of those 4 teams at this point could match up and beat each other in a series, and I wouldn't be shocked to hear it. I mean, the Celtics are obviously, I think, falling back a little bit with the way they're playing. They're on a 4-game losing streak, and they just really look to be not on the same page. The Raptors, I think, might give the Sixers the toughest matchup in terms of they have the depth, the physicality. I think the depth in that matchup would probably be the main thing. The Raptors have, a lot of different guys where, and we've just been talking about the Sixers kind of with a lack of depth. I think they match up decently with the Bucks. We saw that last week. Both teams were pretty much at full health, and they went. It was a tough game, but I like that matchup. So, I think the Raptors would probably be the toughest. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to play, 2 of those teams if they want to get to the finals. And to me, it's pretty much a crapshoot. Like I just feel like those 4 teams are pretty well evenly matched, and on any given day, any of those teams could come out on top. Things could change by the playoff times, and I actually think the Sixers have an advantage in that way because out of all those teams, the Sixers are the ones that made. I mean, like, sure, the Raptors added Mark Gasol, and like the Bucks added Mirotic and Pau Gasol and things like that, but the Sixers are the one team, that made the biggest changes over the course of this season, and that really can say that they're still, their starting 5 has played under 10 games together still at this point, and they're still gelling and learning each other, and they seem to be trending in the right direction, and they could benefit from that potentially if they continue on this pace, kind of like Ryan, we were just talking about, if they can continue to gel and get that confidence, a month from now when April and May hits, there's a chance that the Sixers could be playing a level of basketball that we haven't even seen from them yet, that, other teams have already kind of reached. So it's really up in the air to me. If I had to say specifically, I would say that avoiding the Raptors would probably be ideal. But it's really a crapshoot once the seedings come out.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us aboard What Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter for all your Sixers and NBA updates at The Real Mike KB. Mike, I think one of the things that is constantly brought up, but I think you really don't have an answer for, is Brett Brown. And everyone's got a theory and a perspective on him.
Fire him.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, we got those people too. But, Mike, I want to ask you from your perspective, where do you draw the line for you? If you were, I'm not saying you're speaking for the Sixers organization, but from your observation, the people that you talk to, where do you think Brett Brown really does stand at this point with the organization? Do you think that it's one of those deals where, okay, if Brett at least gets them past the second round, his job is secure. If he loses in the first round, his job is not secure. Like, is there any purely outlined, from your perspective, anything that's set in stone or maybe set in pencil about Brett's future, about Brett, if you don't meet these pre-described criteria, that you might not be here anymore? Or do you think the Sixers are looking at him more like, look, we're not making that decision anytime soon?
That's a great question, Josh, and I think it's both ways. I mean, I think it's fluid. I definitely don't think there's anything written in pencil or pen in terms of his future. I do think that the organization, like front office ownership, has guidelines of what they would like to see from Brett, which is mainly continued progress. But I also think they're realists. If the Sixers run into the Pistons or the Nets in the first round and get smoked, no matter what, first of all, to answer this, start off at the most basic, I don't think that really anything that will happen in the next 2 months will result in Brett being fired. I think he's safe for going into next season regardless, even if, they do somehow lose in the first round to an inferior team, which I don't see happening. If that were to happen, I think that would, obviously automatically put him on the hot seat going into next season. With that being said, I think the team's looking for improvement off of what they did last year, which was obviously going to the second round. So anything past that, a conference finals or obviously a finals appearance would be considered a success. At the same time, they do understand that they made moves this season that were meant to be long-term moves and, altered the chemistry of the team in the short term and really left Brett with, not a disadvantage by any means, because it's certainly talent-wise it's an advantage, but that he certainly kind of had his work cut out for him in terms of incorporating, 3 different rosters over the course of the season. And I think, from Josh Harris to Michael Rubin to the front office, Elton, they understand that it's not necessarily just as easy as, all right, Brett, we've got you this talent, snap your fingers, take us to the championship this season. I don't think anyone's expecting that either. So I think it's just really a fluid situation of they want to see continued growth and improvement from this team. Obviously, losing to an inferior team in the first round would be a strong signifier that growth is not there, which would be a cause for concern. Past that, once you get to that second round, depending on the matchup, going forward, they obviously would like to see a conference finals appearance. I think Josh Harris, publicly stated that was the goal for the team this season after making those moves. But I think that organizationally, they, from everyone that I've talked to, they really do feel like at this point, Brett remains the guy for the job. I think that they, really like how he's been relating to, all the players respect him. Tobias Harris has said, nothing but great things about him. Jimmy and his relationship seems to have gotten, maybe there was a rocky start, but it seems pretty strong at this point. Obviously, Joel and Ben, with him have an extremely strong relationship, which is, paramount to the organization, being that those are their 2 cornerstone guys. They obviously have some input, and as it stands right now, they're both in Brett's corner, which obviously works in his favor. So, that's kind of a long-winded way answer, Josh, but at the end of the day, I think it's a fluid situation, but I do think that there's, they want to see improvement from this team going forward from where they were last year, but at the same time, they're reasonable in the expectations given the situation of the season.
Yeah, it's a little ironic that you mentioned Ben and Joel because on the Zach Lowe podcast, Lowe asked Brett about the relationship between Joel and Ben, and Brett kind of formed it in a way. It was almost like there's not a true co-op, but it's almost like the trinity of the Sixers at this point is Brett, Joel, and Ben, and the three of them seem to have conversations, at least the way Brett described it, that kind of goes beyond the normal coach-player relationship. Like the three of them understand that, look, we're attached at the hip. We are in this together. Win or lose, we are going to be the ones that everybody looks at and everyone holds accountable. And I thought it was interesting how Brett described that because, Mike, a lot of times you don't hear players and their coaches' relationship framed that way. Look at it like Phil Jackson or Greg Popovich. They're the guy, they're the coach, and then the players are the players. But it seems like with Brett, it's almost like him, Joel, and Ben have this understanding. Look, we're in this together, and we either win together or we lose together.
I think you nailed it, Josh, and it's almost something that you can just kind of feel, and it reminds me of something that Brett said, a while back before they kind of turned the corner into a successful playoff team. That he said, to him building this team instead of going, a typical team, the hierarchy is from the top down. He wanted to build it, player up, meaning that the players were the paramount thing in the organization, and he wanted to build the team out through them. And I think that's what he's aimed to do. He's done that from the beginning, basically with every player. I think it's just the fact that Joel and Ben have been, clearly the foundational pieces of this franchise, and they're the ones that are tagged to be, the future of the organization moving forward. But Brett, when Michael Carter-Williams was drafted and Nerlens and Dario, like he kind of built these relationships with these players in a, further than just like a dictator coach type bond that you see in the NBA commonly. And I think that's really his approach to it. Like, that's one thing about Brett. Any criticism that you've heard about him, it's usually X's and O's based or adjustments based, execution based. In terms of his, player development and relationship building, that is, absolutely one of his top skills as an NBA coach. And I think that, especially with Joel, who's been on the team now the longest of anyone, and Ben, who I think also, some of that special bond comes from the fact that, their families go back in terms of Brett, having coached Ben's own, father over in Australia. That's a bond that I think definitely runs pretty deep between both families, and there's a respect there, which adds to it. But I think that's something that, I think gets overlooked with Brett sometimes when people are just in terms of pointing out the X's and O's, but the chemistry and kind of the culture, for lack of a better word, that's been built with the Sixers through the players is really kind of, unique to him. And I think it's been beneficial to the organization as a whole for sure.
MKB, one more for you before we let you go. Ben Simmons. Now he's interesting to me, and sometimes the spotlight's heavy on him, and sometimes it's not. Ever since the Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler and the rest of the crew arrived in town, but the criticism on him has been struggling in the playoffs last year. Everyone remembers that for a variety of different reasons, and struggling against elite teams, specifically Eastern Conference teams, but really just elite teams in general. His aggressiveness at times tends to change. His turnovers tend to go up sometimes, and everything else that comes along with it. Against the Boston Celtics most recently, 13 points, 7 assists, 8 rebounds, and the big thing for me, 2 turnovers. Now, he had 7 against Houston a few weeks back. He had 9 against Golden State in the beginning of the month. But what I'm getting at is how important is his role now with the new toys that are in the starting lineup, and what do you expect from him down the stretch, more importantly, come playoff time?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great point. And I do think that, with the new lineup, it's kind of beneficial to Ben for sure because, he's not looked at necessarily to provide point-wise as much as maybe he even was last year where, he's the fifth leading scorer on this team right now when you're talking about a team that has 5 starters that are all averaging 17 or more points.
Crazy.
So, yeah, it's the only team in the league. I mean, that's definitely an impressive stat. And, Ben, at this point, he's, so much of obviously what he's brought in since he's been to the team is his distribution and, getting these guys the ball in situations where they like it, meaning, JJ hitting them right in the stride for the corner, giving Joel and getting in the post position, Tobias, Jimmy, getting these guys the ball where they like it. I think that's obviously become almost enhanced now since they have so much talent in the starting lineup around Ben. It's in a way taking a little bit of pressure off of him, but when the playoffs come and they're able to target on him more, I think that what Brett's done to put him off ball and grow his comfort in that situation will be beneficial. What we saw against him, in the Celtic last year where he was definitely exposed, I think, obviously it's important to remember that he's, rookies, that happens, and, the turnovers and the maturity comes, and I think he's definitely taken a step in terms of his overall play this year. No, the jump shot hasn't come yet. I think we've seen an improvement from the free throw line, which will be big. Even his confidence from the free throw line and his finishing, around the rim with both hands, I think has taken a huge step forward this year, which is both, small things, but I think will pay dividends in the postseason. And then just having him be comfortable without having to have the ball in his hands in the playoffs, I think will make it more difficult for a team, for instance, like the Celtics did last year, to kind of back off of him and force him to shoot. If he's down on the block, taking up space down there, you're not going to back off of him there, and it'll keep the rest of the offense open. And I think obviously Brett has certainly realized that and did a good job kind of incorporating that action into some of their plays way ahead of time, so that, come in April and May, it's not going to be a situation where all of a sudden Ben's had the ball in his hands all season and now they're like, oh, he's getting pressed to go down to the post. This is, what they're kind of practicing for, having Jimmy initiate the offense so much, especially in clutch time situations. I think it's going to put him, in a better spot, really, to kind of maximize his talents at this point. And then, obviously moving forward, he has, he's impressed me a lot this season. It goes without saying that adding the jump shot would take him to another level, but I think we'll just see, continued growth from him, on both sides of the ball, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be interesting to see how his play in particular goes, plays out down the stretch and into the playoffs. One thing we all know, there's no shortage of storylines surrounding the Philadelphia 76ers nowadays. MKB joining us. Follow him on Twitter, The Real Mike KB, our very own 97.3 ESPN Sixers insider, NBA writer for 24/7 Sports. Always enjoy talking to you, man. Thanks for coming on.
For sure, guys. Thanks for having me. Great talking to you.